Today we're taking a look at one of the most spectacularly bizarre games of chess that's ever been played. It holds the unique and prestigious record of beginning with 17 consecutive pawn moves played by the winning side, which as far as I know is the most ever in a master level game. It was played in 1984 in the Nuremberg Open in Germany between Emil Joseph Diemer and Thomas Heiling. Now Diemer, or the pawnmower man as he's been called, was a chess master with quite a history. He first came to prominence in the mid-1930s in Germany as a chess reporter for a political party that basically became synonymous with pure evil. And I'm sure most of you know what I'm talking about. Turns out that this political involvement of his did not help his career any after World War II. Additionally, he had some mental problems and actually ended up being committed to a psychiatric clinic after becoming totally obsessed with Nostradamus, claiming to have cracked his secret code. So, not a very normal or stable guy by any stretch of the imagination, but he is the guy who played 17 consecutive pawn moves, so maybe that's not all that surprising. But enough about Diemer, let's take a look at this crazy game. Diemer is playing white, and he kicks off this one-of-a-kind encounter with d4. Thomas Heiling responds knight to f6, and already on move 2 we have an oddball move, f3, with the noble ambition of getting in an early e4. Now as black, you really want to ask yourself, why is this move f3 not very popular, and how do I refute it? The answer is nothing cosmic. Best is d5, just holding up e4. What black should not do in a situation like this is play passively, as Heiling now does with the move d6, just allowing Diemer to play his e4, thereby validating his decision to play f3. White is now the preferred side, but after g6, we have another premature pawn thrust, this time to g4. Better would have been knight to c3 or bishop to e3, working towards a queenside castling, since after bishop to g7, g5 is not really yet a problem for black. Diemer plays it anyway though, as if he somehow knows that Heiling is not going to choose the correct response, which is knight to h5, just blocking the h-file, preventing white's thematic follow-up h4 and h5, while threatening things like c5, d5, or e5, supporting a possible knight to f4. Pretty much any kind of centrally challenging move is going to be good for black here, as he's the one who's ahead in development, and only one move away from castling, as opposed to white, who so far has been playing like some beginners I've seen, who only move their pawns, presumably because they lack confidence in their ability to remember how the other pieces move. But I digress. Let's take a look at what was played in the game, where Heiling once again chooses the more passive option, knight f to d7, allowing h4, which is white's best move, headed to h5, which black has no great way to prevent, but Diemer plays the less accurate f4. Okay, it takes more control in the center, it opens the f3 square for the knight, but it also blocks the dark squared bishop's diagonal, allowing black to challenge the g5 pawn with h6, when g takes h6 will no longer result in a trade of dark squared bishops and the loss of black's ability to castle. So h6 is a good equalizing move here, but so is the move played in the game, c5. Heiling's finally doing something proactive in the center. Diemer responds with the best move, d5, just taking more space. Next we have b5, which is a very reasonable human-type move. Is it the top engine move? No. Stockfish recommended the immediate c4, sacrificing a pawn just to clear that nice c5 square for the knight. And for anyone who might be wondering, does this move b5 not sacrifice a pawn as well to bishop takes b5? Well, the answer is nay, as that would lose the bishop to queen to a5 check, and if knight to c3 defending, there's bishop takes c3 with check, followed by queen takes bishop on b5. Diemer is of course aware of this, and so plays his pawn move number 8, c3, blocking the diagonal to his king, and so now threatening bishop takes b5. Heiling defends the pawn with a6, which is not objectively the strongest move. The engine's going to tell you to play c4 instead, because it just really loves that c5 square for black's knight, but Heiling was probably concerned about the move a4 here, looking to undermine black's queenside pawn structure. Maybe he wanted to retain the possibility of playing b4 protected by the c pawn. But Diemer opts for h4, planning h5 of course, to which black should again respond h6, threatening to capture on g5 and bring his rook to life. h5 is a good move as well, but instead, Heiling just ignores the whole kingside situation and plays knight to b6. opening a diagonal for his bishop, as well as the d7 square for his other knight, so it's not the worst move he could have made. Diemer plays his h5, to which h6 is still a good response, but Heiling again ignores his problem on the king side, perhaps hoping that it will just go away, a strategy which seldom works in chess, by the way, unless you have a good counterattack, which Heiling apparently feels he now does with the move e6, challenging white's center. This allows Diemer to play his pawn move number 11, h6, which is best, driving black's bishop back home to f8 while gaining more space. Next we have a move, of a pawn of course, that objectively might not be the most accurate, the engine's recommending knight to f3 with about a 1 pawn advantage to white, but the move Diemer plays, a4, does get maximum points for creativity, being a pawn sacrifice, which really should be accepted now with knight takes a4, when white should respond c4 with some nice pressure on the b5 pawn, which may not move lest the knight on a4 be lost. There's also the idea of playing b3, kicking the knight off a4, followed by bishop to b2, activating the bishop along this fantastic diagonal with tempo on black's rook. Heiling apparently didn't like the looks of that, and so in the game, he chooses to ignore what's happening on the wing, as he has a history of doing, and instead counters in the center with e takes d5. This is an inaccuracy as it allows Diemer to grab even more space with a5, attacking the knight on b6. What black needs to play now is knight to c4, attacking the pawn on a5 with 2 pieces, while keeping the diagonal open for his light squared bishop, the d7 square available for his knight. But after what's played in the game, knight to d7 and e takes d5, black's queenside development is severely restricted, having no moves for his knights at the moment. All he can really do is play c4 and then knight to c5, but this will require another 2 moves and will relinquish control of the d4 square, which will be a nice outpost for a white knight. Having said that, it's not super obvious to me why this position should be as bad as Stockfish thinks it is, with an evaluation of almost 2 pawns in white's favor. But it is a pretty weird position, and so it's probably a bit more resistant to human comprehension than most. Anyway, play continues bishop to e7. It's interesting that Heiling didn't play c4 while he had the chance, since this allows Diemer to now prevent it with c4, going for an absolute stranglehold on the black position. The pawn on b5 is now attacked twice, but do you think Heiling does anything about it? Nope. He counterattacks with f6, which is actually one of his best moves, challenging white's oppressive kingside pawn structure. The pawn on g5 is now under threat, and how do you think white should respond? Take a minute if you'd like, ponder the position. The only move that maintains the win is knight to f3, simply defending g5. But that's not a pawn move, which we still need 2 more of to get us to move 17. And you gotta wonder if at this point Diemer was consciously giving preferential treatment to pawn moves, realizing that this game was already quite unique and just might end up becoming his biggest claim to fame. Whatever his reasoning, he now proceeds to throw away his entire winning advantage with c takes b5, which doesn't accomplish anything except allowing black to equalize with a takes b5. This was not played in the game, but it would have activated black's rook on a8, which means white's pawn on a5 would be attacked twice, with no great way to defend it. Bishop to d2 could just be met with b4. Black is still threatening to win the pawn on g5 as well, so it really didn't make any sense for Diemer to capture on b5. What's played in the game, though, after c takes b5, is the blunderous f takes g5. How could this be bad? Pause the video if you'd like to try to find white's best response. White's only winning move, not played by Diemer, is b6. And this time he's got no excuse because it is a pawn move. Turns out that preventing black from activating his a8 rook while gaining a protected pass pawn on b6 is much more valuable than anything white can do on the king side, or anywhere else on the board. But the king side is where Diemer wants to try to prove his advantage. He can see that f takes g5 will just help black untie himself with bishop takes g5 and knight to e5, so he decides to try f5, which here on move 17 marks the end of his epic run of consecutive pawn moves. Now what's remarkable about this move is that not only does it throw away white's entire winning advantage, it actually gives black a winning position, if he plays knight to e5 or castles, which might sound weird, but it's a weird position. A takes b5 is good as well, although not an absolute necessity like it was before. Allowing white to play b6 is not so bad anymore since black has counterplay on the king side, having the passed g-pawn, which can be pushed to g4, supported by a knight on e5, and potentially the light-squared bishop as well. Heiling misses his winning opportunity though, and instead plays the natural-looking g takes f5, allowing Diemer's queen to slide into h5 with check. Not a good thing. Aside from the fact that it makes black's next move a very easy decision, in that his only legal move is king to f8. Now black cannot castle, which despite all the open air around his king side, would have still been better than leaving his king in the center. Diemer should now take the opportunity to play b6, which is good for the same previously mentioned reasons, but he overestimates his kingside prospects now and plays knight to f3, once again giving black a chance to get a winning position, with the move that Heiling did not play, knight to f6, attacking both the white queen and the pawn on d5. So after queen takes g5, which isn't even the best move since it allows rook to g8 with tempo on the queen, and let's say queen to d2 defending d5, knight to e4 hitting the queen again, queen to e3, and a takes b5, black's knight is now beautifully posted on e4, he's ready to capture the pawn on a5, he's got the active rook on g8, the relatively safe king, bishop to f6 is looking very nice. So white is in big trouble here, losing trouble. Heiling squanders this golden opportunity though, in the game, where he plays the immediate rook to g8, adding defense to g5, which was attacked thrice. This gives Diemer the chance to finally play b6, which is the best move in the position and the only one that doesn't lose, bringing the position back to approximate equilibrium. Now as black, if you want to go after white's pawn on d5, you best do it right away with knight to f6, with an attack on white's queen. Heiling mistakenly thinks that playing bishop to b7 first is going to work just as well, since after Diemer's knight to c3 defending, he's still got knight to f6, with the fork. However, because his bishop is no longer guarding e6, Diemer has a very nice tactical shot. Knight takes g5. And after Heiling responds knight takes queen on h5, there's knight to e6, forking king and queen. The king goes to e8, the knight takes the queen of course, which brings black to an interesting quandary. Should he take the knight on d8, or go for more material with knight to g3, attacking the rook? Turns out it doesn't really matter, since both moves are losing. If king takes d8, then there's rook takes h5, attacking f5, when white's spatial advantage, protected passer, and active pieces will decide the game. I'll leave that line to you to play around with if you'd like, but what's played in the game is knight to g3, attacking the rook on h1. I like it. When in doubt, go for that material. Now if the rook moves, then there's king takes d8 when black's a piece up, for which white has some compensation, though nowhere near winning. So what's played is knight takes bishop on b7, allowing knight takes rook on h1 when black emerges the exchange up, for which white does have winning compensation, with the move now played by Diemer, bishop to f4, attacking d6. Rook to g6 defends, we have queenside castling, threatening a discovered attack on the h1 knight with something like bishop to d3, hitting f5. Heiling gets that knight out of dodge with knight to f2, attacking the rook, which moves to e1, pinning the bishop to the king, and so once again threatening to win the pawn on d6. King to d7 takes care of that, but now Diemer finds a very pretty move. See if you can spot it. White has multiple winning moves in this position, but see if you can find the one that is strongest and most forcing. Diemer's brilliant move is knight to b5, hitting that d6 pawn a third time. Now, if a takes b5, then white actually has checkmate in 8 moves with bishop takes b5 check, which will force the black king to abandon the defense of the bishop on e7 with king to c8, which will then be picked up with rook takes e7 with checkmate just around the corner. So in the game, Heiling prudently leaves the knight on b5 alone and plays knight to e4, adding defense to d6. And what do you think Diemer does now? Pause and ponder if you want to try to guess, but here it comes. It's another sacrifice of another exchange with rook takes e4. And if you're questioning whether that d6 pawn is really worth such a sacrifice, well, you're right to question it because there is more to it than the mere winning of a pawn. Since if f takes e4, which was not played in the game, white would have bishop to h3 check, forcing black's king to e8, after which the most straightforward winning option is knight to c7 check, forking the king and rook, when white will emerge with a slight material plus and a totally crushing position. What's tried in the game, after rook takes e4, is rook to g1, attacking that troublesome bishop while pinning it to the king. Deemer plays rook to e1, defending the bishop. He's now up a bit in material, having the two minor pieces for the rook. Pawn takes knight on b5 is of course still a no-go, as it would drop the rook on g1 to bishop takes b5 with check. But Heiling can and does return the material count to equilibrium now with rook takes f1. And after rook takes f1, now he's all good to capture the knight on b5. So on paper, black's looking pretty okay. However, on the board, he's totally hosed, which Deemer now proceeds to demonstrate with the totally devastating rook to g1, just looking for rook to g7, followed by rook takes h7, if there's nothing better, which there probably will be. Heiling plays king to c8, attacking the knight on b7, a futile endeavor, as all of his moves are, since Deemer can now grab on d6 with check. The bishop captures, the bishop recaptures. White is now threatening to win black's knight with rook to g8 check. Heiling answers that with knight to d7. We have rook to g8 check anyway, king to b7, rook to g7, attacking the knight, pinning it to the king. King to c8 defends. The h-pawn falls. So does the pawn on a5, but that's irrelevant because here comes b7 check. Now if king to d8, then there's rook takes knight, followed by the promotion of the b-pawn, although rook to h8 check would win even quicker. What's played is king takes b7, dropping the knight to rook takes d7 check, and after king to c8 and h7 threatening to promote, we have rook to a1 check, king to c2, at which point Heiling does not play rook to h1 to prevent the pawn from immediately promoting, seeing that after something like rook to g7, black has no way to prevent rook to g8 with check, followed by the promotion on h8. So what's tried in the game is king takes d7, just allowing the promotion, to a queen of course. Heiling does get to pick up the bishop on d6, but after queen to d8 check, king to e5 and d6, he's had his fill, and in this position, resigns the game. Since there's just no stopping white's d-pawn, and even if there was, his rook would be no match for the queen anyway. So there you have it, the immortal pawn game played by the OG pawnmower man himself. Give me all your thoughts about this one in the comments. Push those pawns early and often. Maybe you'll be the one to break Deemer's record. Or maybe it's already been broken. If you know of a master game that opens with more consecutive pawn moves than this one, definitely let me know about it. But that's it for now. Hit that like button if you liked anything even remotely related to this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. You won't regret it. And I will see you next time.